The scream that split the Virginia night on March 15, 1847 wasn't a sound. It was a verdict. I remember the way the air felt that evening in Cumberland County. Wet as cloth, thick with tobacco dust and wood smoke. By dawn, a silence heavier than thunder pressed down on Peetton Grove. Doors stood open. Lamps burned out on their wicks. And inside the big house, 13 bodies waited in poses so calm, you might think sleep had simply reached up and turned their heads the wrong way. They said the cuts were too clean. They said there wasn't enough blood. They said whoever did it knew the neck the way a river knows its own bank. In the court files, sealed, smudged, and mean with secrets, one name returns like a fingerprint under ash, Isaac. They gave him another name after that night. I won't repeat it here. I'll tell you what I found instead. A man sold cheap and watched closely. Hands like tools, eyes like winter glass, and a room where knives hung in straight lines like prayers turned sideways. Before we begin, subscribe and comment your state below. I want to see where this old darkness still reaches, because what happened at Peetton Grove is more than a murder story. It's a ledger of power, of chains and quiet study, of a man who learned the human body the way the master learned the market, and then flipped both. So here's my question. Was Isaac a monster born or a monster made? 1847 Virginia. One night, 13 bodies arranged like art. I first met Isaac on paper. A bill of sale dates him like a storm. October 1844, Prince Edward County to Cumberland. One male laborer named Isaac, price reduced at the buyer's insistence. The parchment crackles like old leaves. Whoever folded it did so quickly. The records say he learned meat before he learned mercy. Slaughter pens, winter steam, the red fog that lifts when a hog goes limp. Men who worked beside him swore he could dress an animal in half the time of anybody else and keep his apron bone white doing it. Clean as a hymn, one overseer wrote, almost admiring. Almost, but rumors grow like ivy around bare facts. Someone saw him watching after the work was done, standing very still, hands behind his back, studying the way the body falls away from itself. Another swore he'd found a sow arranged on a plank in pieces too neat to be called butchering. No purpose to it, the man said, just order. I keep circling his eyes in the testimonies, pale gray like a frost that never thaws. It's a color I've learned to respect in men who have no room to speak. People called him dull because he did not answer quickly. They called him obedient because his face did not tell stories. But the enslaved learned early the price of showing your mind. Silence is a skin some people wear to stay alive. Try to follow the math. A man with rare skill in livestock, strong as a gate hinge, sold 30% under value to Cornelius Peetton. Why? Sellers don't bleed profit without reason. The letter attached to the bill gives it away in a single line. Recommend removal from the county. No return. It isn't proof of danger. It's proof of unease. That creeping feeling you can't name when someone moves in a room and nothing rattles. There's no baptism record for an Isaac of that description in the county church books. No midwife note. No mother marked. Men vanish into this system every day. Sold across rivers, renamed, counted as iron and hay. But I keep wondering whether he appeared here full grown, like a blade pulled from wrapping, already sharpened, already shaped. The enslaved at Peetton later called him a cold mercy. By that, they meant he worked without fuss, cleaned his own blood troughs, mended his own tools, stepped aside for old folks, and split his ration when a fever ran the quarters. The same hands that hushed a squealing hog steadied a child's head during a coughing night. People are not one thing. That's a lesson most ledgers never learn. I read another line in the margins of a planter's diary. He listens like he's measuring you. If you've ever stood near a man who can take a house apart by ear, count the nails by the creak, find the stud by the hollow knock, you've met this kind of mind. Observation is a hunger. Feed it enough, it begins to bite back. By the time Isaac walked the Cumberland Road under a bruised October sky, Peetton had already planned the slaughterhouse he would build for him. Thick brick walls, cool as a cellar, windows slit like wary eyes. It would sit 200 yards from the big house, the distance between appetite and its cost. I have a feeling Isaac understood distances better than most. He knew how far sound travels on a damp night, how long a lantern burns on a stingy wick, how many steps it takes to get from a locked door to a sleeping throat. What makes a man? Birth paper? Price? Or the things he learns about where the soft places are? 1844, Virginia. One bill of sale. One pair of winter gray eyes. A silence that starts measuring the room. Do you think history erases men like Isaac or fears them? Cumberland County can look beautiful if you don't read it right. Tobacco quilts the hills in tidy green squares. And the James River idles past like a gentleman with nowhere he needs to be. But it takes bone to make that picture. Bone and breath. And every white porch in sight was laid on a subfloor of somebody else's life. Peetton Grove rose on a gentle swell of earth. White columns wrap around shade. The kind of house that pretends to be a temple, so folks forget what's being worshipped. Cornelius Peetton liked to say he didn't believe in overseers. A man watches his own investment, he'd remark, tapping his ledger with a finger that smelled of ink and brandy. He didn't need an overseer. He carried one behind his eyes. He built Isaac a slaughterhouse that winter. Brick thick enough to outlast a drought, rafters high, drains cut like small red mouths to the yard. Inside, hooks, pegs, rails, each hardware piece a sentence. When the smokehouse sighed in summer, when salt stung the air and flies drew script in the light, Isaac's place stayed clean. He boiled his knives at day's end. He oiled the hinges. He sorted cleavers by weight the way a violinist sorts bows by feel. I've seen the inventory list. 12 knives, each marked by length and curvature. 3 cleavers, one heavy enough to split bone like kindling. 2 stones, fine and coarse. 1 steel for edging. Aprons canvas waxed. Hooks measured not just by span but by tolerance. The list reads like prayer beads. Cornelius collected the unmanageable. He had a talent for it. Men broken by other plantations arrived here and somehow stitched themselves to a routine Peetton called order. They weren't healed. They were filed. He bought Isaac for the skill and the price. He kept him for the results. Meat cured perfect. Waste near nothing. Profit clean, but a plantation is not a factory. It's a weather system. Temperance meetings on Sundays that never reach the quarters. A daughter practicing scales while someone's wrists blister in the cane patch. I walk through the main house with my mind. The way I learned as a child to count rooms by drafts. Parlor with its needlework half done. Dining table set to the Peetton crest. Study heavy with mahogany and clean arithmetic. Everything arranged to suggest permanence. Out back, Isaac worked without witnesses. He preferred it. Not out of shame, out of control. Cannot keep a datum pure when too many eyes are on it. He salted, smoked, recorded. He adjusted boil times depending on the day's barometer. He cut along cartilage planes most men hack across. People called it knack. In another country, it would have been called school. When storms rolled in, the big house collected gossip like rain in a barrel. The new man's too quiet. He looks through you. He makes the dogs uneasy. I note which stories came from white mouths and which from black. The enslaved rarely told ghost tales about him. They told caution, don't surprise him. Don't stand where shadow breaks the floor. Don't ask him to work on Sunday. His hands go colder then. They said he returned tools exactly where he found them. In a world designed to misplace you, precision is descent. I picture him walking the yard at dusk, counting steps between kitchen and smokehouse, testing which floorboards in the back hall complain when trod, learning the rhythm of locks. The same mind that keeps salt from caking in humidity can learn when a master sets down his glass. Cornelius believed order would keep fear harnessed. He didn't read the difference between quiet and calm. Quiet can be a storm lowering its ceiling. Calm can be a man's face while his mind sharpens. I've come to believe the slaughterhouse was not just Isaac's workplace. It was his language. Inside those brick walls, he could arrange the world to obey. Every tool on its line, every motion exact. And the body, animal or human, was a set of gates he knew how to open. 1846 Cumberland. One brick room of order. A man who files the world by edge and weight. If freedom costs blood, would you pay it? Some skills blur the line between care and control. When fever licked the quarters, Isaac boiled cloth and cooled foreheads with water, changed bedding with a delicacy that surprised even those who had not expected gentleness from him. The old ones kept an eye on him anyway. He moved like a man measuring what cannot be measured. I tracked 2 accounts of animals arranged out back. hog parts set out in such tidy quadrants you'd think a surveyor had laid string over the table. No sense to it, one laborer said. Wasn't for sellin' or eatin'. Just careful, that word again. It keeps showing up where affection should, where anger should. Careful like a man putting a baby to sleep. Careful like a man building a trap with nothing but silence in it. At night, the brick held the days cool. Lamps made small yellow skies on the work table. I imagine him then, sleeves rolled, apron folded clean at the corner, bones disassembled not for hunger but for knowledge. Don't put too much mystique on it. Men learn with their hands when the world denies them paper. But Isaac had paper too. The floorboard beneath his narrow cot was loose. Not by shortcut carpentry, by design. Under that tongue and groove, later we would find journals. You'll meet them in a future chapter. For now, think of them as a second pair of hands. Ones that could draw. Not rough skins and stickmen, but tendons traced like rivers, vertebrae stacked like cordwood, organs nested like secrets. Whoever taught him, if anyone did, passed down discipline, if not restraint. People say not all fear is the same flavor. Overseers grew spooked by what they couldn't name. The room too tidy, the drain too clear. The enslaved reserved their fear for men with whips and hungry sons. What they felt around Isaac was closer to weather, a lowering, a sense that the air itself held its breath when he entered. Still, they came to him with practical things. A nicked thumb, a twisted ankle, a tooth that needed pulling. He worked quickly, gently, unbothered by the human part of it, the part that makes most men flinch. I read one line in a midwife's mouth as remembered by her granddaughter. He had a clean sorrow about him. That's a phrase I don't forget. It means a man who has put something terrible away in a drawer and keeps it there by polishing the handle. Cornelius visited the slaughterhouse rarely. The gentleman liked results, not methods. He commented once to his brother, Dr. Jonathan, that profits were consolidating. I imagine the physician noticed more than the ledger, the geometry of Isaac's tools, the absence of mess, the way he washed his hands like a surgeon heading to a cutting theater he could never step into. If you were listening carefully that winter, you could hear 2 clocks on the property. One measured the hours of tobacco in accounts. The other measured steps, weight, wind, locks, breathing. Isaac wound the second with patient fingers. Every day's order was a page in a book only he could read. Then came small tests in the big house. A vase moved 6 inches, a door left on its third hinge, a latch pressed twice and then not fully closed. Not mischief, mapping? If a mistress frowns in the morning. If a master reaches for the same key ring by habit. If a child wakes when that board in the landing complains. These are facts you cannot buy in Richmond markets. You learn them, and once learned, they behave. Over months, the slaughterhouse stopped being a room and became an alibi. People assume horror hides in noise. Often it isn't hidden at all. It's filed, cooled, marked, and set aside, waiting for a night damp enough to carry sound away from a house full of sleepers. I don't forgive him with these words. I don't condemn him either. I am trying to show you how a man can build a language out of edges and quiet, until that language begins writing him back. 1846 through 1847. A loose floorboard. Ink and tendon. Order practicing its lines. Would you have trusted Isaac or feared him? Plans don't arrive like thunder. They grow like mold, quiet, invisible, patient. By the winter of 1846, Isaac's silence was no longer empty. It was recording. His journals show the drift. Early entries are lists, feed amounts, slaughter weights, weather notes. But by December, the ink turns sharper. Mistress moves vase 3 fingers left. Boy coughs when floorboard at stair groans. Master takes brandy before accounts, slower with locks after. Each line reads like a surgeon's hand tracing veins before the cut. The Peettons mistook his stillness for dullness. Margaret praised his tidiness. Cornelius praised his thrift. Neither understood that Isaac's attention was not obedience. It was measurement. Every habit became a coordinate. Every sound a landmark. He knew the house's lungs better than its owners. He knew which hinge would betray him and which would not. That knowledge wasn't curiosity anymore. It was weaponry. Neighbors spoke of Isaac's uncanny precision with hogs, how he could separate bone from sinew in one pull. But his journals show he practiced more subtle cuts, not flesh yet, but time. He shifted objects half an inch, left latches a whisper open, stirred routines like a spoon through molasses. The family noticed unease but never cause. They rubbed their eyes, blamed fatigue, and went on with their days. That was Isaac's rehearsal, seeing how much reality could bend before it broke. One entry chills me more than the rest. Children laugh in circle, heads tilt inward. A sketch beneath it shows not pigs, not deer, but human vertebrae, arranged like petals. He wasn't dreaming violence in bursts. He was composing it like music. Cumberland winters fall heavy and slow. Smoke clings to rafters. Men hunch closer to stoves. And in that slowness, Isaac's plan sharpened. He learned the guards' sleep. He learned which dogs barked at foxes, and which only stirred for men. He noted which lanterns guttered quickest in drafty halls. He wrote of them as if studying weather patterns. South corridor, gusts after midnight. Nursery window warms fastest near dawn. To him, the family were not masters anymore. They were variables in an experiment. Some say rebellion is born of rage. But Isaac's rage was frozen, not burning. His rebellion was clinical. He didn't shout in the fields or strike a whip hand. He bent down, sharpened his cleaver, and wrote his plan like scripture. The enslaved around him sensed it in their bones. One woman recalled how he stared into the fire, expressionless, as if waiting for the flames to form words. Another said he walked the yard at night, pacing exact paces between porch and smokehouse. They felt a storm under the calm, but storms had come before. Most blew past. This one did not. By early 1847, Isaac had stopped writing observations and begun writing directives. Remove in silence. Cut at hinge. Arrange with care. He called it his final experiment. But final for whom? For himself or for the system that thought it owned him? What I know is this. The night of March 15th didn't arrive suddenly. It was built, brick by brick, step by step, note by note. And when it came, it would look less like rage, and more like a man finally speaking in the only language the world had allowed him. Winter, 1846-47. One journal. One plan, one silence waiting to split open. Do you think history remembers truth or only survival? March 15th opened like any other spring day in Cumberland County. Tobacco seedlings pushed green against the frost. Margaret Peetton fussed in the garden. And Cornelius balanced his ledgers with that smug confidence only a man who never touches soil can manage. By noon, the plantation hummed its usual rhythm. Children at lessons, servants hauling, Isaac sharpening steel in the brick house out back. The sound of stone on knife was steady as a heartbeat, but something was different in the air. That damp, metallic scent people later swore they noticed but could never place. The enslaved quarters were unusually quiet. No laughter, no lullabies. Just a waiting hush like the moment before thunder. It began in shadow. Old Bessie, the healer, never reported for her rounds. A field hand vanished from the rows. And the dogs, those restless mongrels chained near the smokehouse, lay down without a sound, as if commanded. When Dr. Jonathan, the visiting brother, walked toward the cabins at dusk, he found doors ajar, beds neat, fires cold. He thought illness had swept the quarters. Then he smelled it. Iron and ash, not sickness but slaughter. Isaac's cabin door swung half open. Stains darkened the threshold, stains that no rain could wash. Inside, the rafters bore a weight they were never built for. At first glance, it looked like sides of pork, cut clean, hung even, dripping almost nothing. But the proportions were wrong. Too long in the limb, too narrow at the waist. The doctor's breath snapped short when he realized what he was seeing. Men and women, rendered like stock, displayed with clinical grace. He staggered back, bile burning his throat. But the silence followed him. Not a scream from the quarters. Not a cry from the main house. Just the steady rasp of his own breath. The plantation had become a graveyard still in rehearsal. Inside the big house, the meal sat waiting. China plates cooling, candles dripping. Needlework frozen mid-stitch. Chairs pushed back just slightly. As if their owners had risen calmly, even willingly. Upstairs, the hush deepened. Carpet stains traced a line to Cornelius's study. His body slumped in his leather chair, ledger open, hands placed as though still writing. His head rested on the desk in front of him, severed so precisely it could have been a waxwork. No overturned ink, no spatter, just a grotesque balance of business and death. Room after room told the same story. Margaret in her chamber, arranging flowers, her head placed among the blooms. The children in their nursery, seated in a circle, heads gathered in the center like a new game. Every tableau deliberate, calm, monstrous. Violence without chaos. Death without noise. The house had not been attacked. It had been composed. By midnight, the plantation was nothing but still life. 13 bodies in order. A silence deeper than prayer. And Isaac gone. No blood on the floorboards. No prints in the mud. Only the faint echo of knives put away in their places. The Peetton Grove massacre was not discovery. It was unveiling. Years of observation condensed into one night. One exhibition of rebellion so precise it shook even the lawmen who lived by the lash. March 15th, 1847. One plantation. 13 corpses arranged like art. The butcher was gone. Would you have looked inside or run? When Sheriff Hawthorne first stepped through the white-columned doorway of Peetton Grove, he expected carnage. He expected overturned furniture, splintered doors, bloody handprints clawing down plaster. Instead, he found stillness, a silence so complete it made his boots sound like gunshots on the wood. The dining table was set for supper, porcelain gleaming under candle stubs. Plates bore half-congealed food untouched. Chairs were pulled back neatly, as if the family had simply risen from a finished meal. But the air, metallic dense, told another truth. Something had happened here. Something deliberate. Upstairs, the study revealed Cornelius Peetton as though still at work. Ledger open, ink drying, hands folded on the armrests of his leather chair. But his head, severed clean, rested atop the ledger, chin tilted slightly toward the page. The sheriff later wrote, "He looked as if consulting his own accounts." In the bedchamber, Margaret was frozen mid-task. A vase of flowers stood on the dressing table, water still rippling from a recent pour. Her body slumped forward, arms extended, arranging stems. Her head was missing from her shoulders, but not from the room. It rested among the blossoms, face turned gently toward the petals. A grotesque bouquet, the nursery chilled them most. 4 children seated in a circle on the carpet, their bodies upright, hands almost touching. At the center of their play lay 4 severed heads facing one another, as though whispering a secret only they could understand. No struggle, no terror left etched into their faces, just quiet, as if death had crept in behind them and pinched the candle of life without warning. On the back porch, old Prudence rocked silently in her chair. Her Bible sat on the side table, spectacles folded on top, head placed beside them like part of her evening ritual. The rocker still swayed when they found her, nudged by a draft from the open door. In the kitchen, Catherine appeared mid-baking, apron dusted with flour. Her body leaned over the counter, dough pressed beneath her fingers. Her head was set upon the wooden board, surrounded by the very bread she'd been shaping. The knife she had used lay to the side, untouched. What horrified investigators was not only the precision of the cuts, but the lack of blood. No pools on the floor, no spatter across walls. Each body seemed drained elsewhere, arranged here afterward. The entire house was a stage, and Isaac had been the playwright. The coroner whispered, "It is as if the victims consented." But everyone knew consent could never exist here. Isaac's rebellion was not chaos. It was surgery, a dissection of family, of plantation power, of the lie that masters were untouchable in their own homes. Peetton Grove no longer felt like a household. It felt like a cathedral gutted of prayer, filled instead with exhibits of mortality. Every tableau said the same thing. Death is orderly if you know the body well enough. And somewhere beyond those white columns, the man who had turned a home into a mausoleum walked free, knives clean, silence intact. Peetton Grove, 1847, a mansion of still life, not chaos, composition. If you saw your master's head on his own desk, would you feel fear or freedom? Sheriff Thomas Hawthorne had seen blood before. Cumberland County wasn't gentle. He'd walked into tavern brawls turned deadly, hunting cabins where jealousies ended in axe strokes, and fields where enslaved men had tried to rise and been cut down. Violence was loud, messy, and human. What he saw at Peetton Grove was none of those things. He entered the study first, boots echoing on the polished floor, hat clutched to his chest. Cornelius sat headless, ledger open. Hawthorne froze, not from gore, but from the order of it. He whispered to his deputy, "This ain't murder. This is arrangement. Room after room told the same story, deliberate, careful staging. Bodies drained, blood absent. No overturned chairs, no claw marks on doors. No sign that anyone had fought or fled. To Hawthorne's seasoned eyes, it looked less like a crime and more like a demonstration. The coroner, William Fitzgerald, bent low over Cornelius's neck wound. His voice shook. Single cut, surgical. Whoever did this had hands steadier than any doctor I know. He examined the children next. Each neck severed at the same angle, same depth. No ragged edges. These weren't hacked, he said. They were drawn like ink lines. Hawthorne frowned. And yet no screams? Not a one. Neighbors swore they'd heard nothing but the wind that night. Dogs hadn't barked. Lamps hadn't been knocked over. 13 people had died without razing the countryside. The sheriff's mind turned practical. One man couldn't move all these bodies without help. One man couldn't drain so much blood without leaving rivers of it somewhere. Yet every sign pointed to a single name, Isaac, missing, vanished. They searched his cabin again. The deputies gagged at the rafters. Human limbs hung neat as butchered hogs. On the table, knives gleamed, each polished, each in its place. Fitzgerald traced a finger along one edge and muttered, "Sharper than a surgeon's." Beneath the floorboards, they found what the doctor first missed. Leather-bound journals stacked like hidden sermons. Each page inked with notes, diagrams, even drawings of the very family now lying in pieces. Routines mapped. Weaknesses catalogued. An entire household studied like specimens. Hawthorne slammed the book shut. This ain't rage. This is rehearsal. He could stomach brutality, but this chilled him. It meant planning. It meant calculation. And it meant Isaac hadn't simply snapped. He had composed. The sheriff faced another truth he dared not write in his report. The system itself had armed Isaac. They had trained him to cut flesh clean. They had given him space, tools, solitude. They mistook his silence for docility. They had built the very chamber that taught him to master death, and now they were forced to reckon with it. By nightfall, Hawthorne saddled his horse and looked back once more at the columns of Peetton Grove, now a mausoleum. His voice was low, meant for no ears but his own. If one man can do this, what stops another? The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. No one answered. The law had no words for what had bloomed in that house of silence. Spring 1847. A sheriff with no answers. 13 corpses, one missing butcher. Is justice possible when the system itself is unjust? The journals smelled of smoke and tallow. The scent of pages that had known firelight more than daylight. Sheriff Hawthorne laid them out across the coroner's table. Leather cracked, ink still dark. At first glance, they seemed harmless. Notes about weather, meat yields, salt ratios. Nothing more than the records of a butcher's trade. But Fitzgerald, the coroner, read deeper, and his face turned pale. The early entries were innocent enough. 3 hogs dressed in mourning. Cartilage joint yields best when cut at angle. Storm dampens curing time. But a dozen pages in, the words began to shift. The handwriting grew sharper, deliberate. Mistress moves vase 3 fingers left. Child coughs when floorboard creaks. Master slower with locks after brandy. The journals weren't about livestock anymore. They were about people. Each Peetton family member had their own section. Habits, tempers, weaknesses catalogued like specimens. Margaret's sleepless nights, Samuel's cough, Elizabeth's habit of reading by the nursery window. Even Cornelius's exact steps from parlor to study, counted and underlined. This was not rebellion and rage. This was surveillance. Then came the sketches. At first livestock, spines, rib cages, joints. But gradually the proportions changed. Vertebrae lengthened. Shoulders narrowed. Faces appeared, half-finished, eyes shaded gray. These were no barnyard diagrams. They were anatomical studies of people, rendered with a precision no plantation schooling could explain. Every tendon traced, every organ shaded. Fitzgerald whispered, "This is the hand of a surgeon." Most chilling were the directives, scrawled like commandments: cut at hinge, remove in silence, arrange with care. And in the margins, final experiment, 13. The number matched the bodies found in the big house. One entry struck the sheriff hardest. Beneath a sketch of the nursery, Isaac had written, "Children laugh in circle. Heads tilt inward. Conversation continues when silence falls." The scene mirrored exactly how the Peetton children were discovered. Bodies seated, heads gathered at the center. Isaac hadn't improvised that night. He had rehearsed it in ink long before. The coroner turned another page and found notes about sound and time. Floorboard creaks after 2 steps. Lock yields if pressed thrice. Breath ceases in 7 seconds with proper cut. The precision was terrifying. It meant Isaac hadn't only studied flesh. He had studied the act of death itself, reducing it to rhythm, measurement, inevitability. And then, the strangest passages, references to disciples and students of the art. Vague, cryptic, but consistent. The disciple will learn silence. The student must not tremble. Who were they? Were others involved? Or were these imaginary accomplices, phantoms of his own divided mind? No one could say. Sheriff Hawthorne closed the final book and rubbed his temples. He'd expected rage, blood, chaos. Instead, he held proof of something colder. A man who turned oppression into calculus, anatomy into rebellion, murder into composition. Isaac hadn't snapped. He had studied, tested, perfected. For 3 years he had lived among them, preparing every detail like a conductor rehearsing his final symphony. Fitzgerald finally broke the silence. This isn't madness. This is method. And method doesn't end in one house. Spring 1847. One floorboard lifted. A library of death revealed. Would you call this madness or rebellion? News of Peetton Grove traveled faster than the James River's current. By the week's end, every tavern in Cumberland County had a version. A demon in chains, a butcher gone mad, a ghost who slit throats without leaving blood. Fear made the stories grow teeth, but all pointed to the same missing man, Isaac. Sheriff Hawthorne rode dawn to dusk, deputies fanning out across counties. They searched cabins, barns, even church cellars, expecting noise and chaos. But Isaac left only patterns. In Buckingham County, livestock were found slaughtered, pieces arranged in spirals no farmer could explain. In Charlotte, 2 enslaved workers were discovered in their beds, peaceful as sleepers, yet each bore the same invisible puncture at the base of the skull. In Nottoway, a plantation family simply vanished, their home untouched, supper still warm on the table. It was as if Isaac was both everywhere and nowhere, studying, rehearsing, moving. Fear turned planters savage. Locks doubled, whips cracked harder, and suspicion poisoned every glance at the enslaved. If one can do this, one owner muttered, perhaps all can. The system itself trembled, and that frightened them most. Then came a knock at Dr. Jonathan Peetton's door in Cumberland Courthouse. The visitor was Samuel Woodson, a free black blacksmith from Farmville. He spoke quietly but firmly. I knew Isaac before chains. His name was Isaac Thornton. Woodson claimed they had both lived in Philadelphia years earlier. Isaac had not been a plantation boy at all, but an assistant to a physician, Dr. Marcus Whitfield, known for his anatomical lectures. Woodson remembered Isaac as gifted with scalpel and sketch, a man who could draw muscles like rivers across paper. But he also remembered Isaac's obsession, slipping into the anatomy hall at night, experimenting on cadavers long after students had gone. He called it art, Woodson said, not medicine. When Isaac was caught, Whitfield cast him out. Not long after, bodies began to disappear from graveyards near the Schuylkill River. Authorities hunted him, but Isaac vanished. Woodson believed he had been seized by slave catchers while fleeing south, stripped of identity, sold under a false bill, delivered to plantations that never asked too many questions. Do you think he was born a slave? Woodson whispered. But he was made one. And he never forgave the world for it. Sheriff Hawthorne felt the ground shift under his boots. The journals, the precision, the silence, it all fit. Isaac hadn't just learned in slaughterhouses. He'd once studied in halls of science, his mind sharpened by scalpels meant for healing. Chains had turned that knowledge sideways, bending curiosity into cruelty, rebellion into anatomy. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. If he was free once, then he's not just a fugitive. He's a ghost of 2 worlds, the one that taught him and the one that caged him. Rumors of Isaac spread farther than the posse could ride. Some swore he was gathering followers, runaways, angry men, even poor whites who tasted his philosophy of death as art. Every whisper made him larger, less man and more legend. And legends are harder to catch than fugitives. 47, Virginia. One fugitive. One secret past in Philadelphia. The hunt begins. If you had his knowledge, would you have used it for healing or for vengeance? Colonel William Randolph's estate had stood since the days when Virginia still bowed to a king. Brick chimneys, oak-lined drives, portraits of ancestors glaring down from paneled walls. To the Randolphs, it was heritage. To Isaac, it was canvas. When the lawman arrived after a neighbor raised alarm, the house was quiet, lamps still burning low. Inside the parlor, they froze. 17 members of the Randolph family sat at the dining table, dressed in their finery, hands folded neatly on the linen. Each head rested on a plate before them, eyes open, mouths slack, as if waiting for grace to be said. Candles flickered across crystal goblets filled not with wine but silence. In the ballroom, the horror deepened. 32 enslaved people had been arranged in dancing poses, bodies swaying without music. But their heads were wrong. Masters' heads, mismatched and grotesque, fixed atop enslaved shoulders. A grotesque vision of unity that could never exist in life. It was rebellion made spectacle, a mockery of Virginia's order. The sheriff whispered to his men, "This ain't one man anymore." He was right. The sheer scope of the work demanded help. Witnesses later recalled seeing Isaac with 3 companions, 2 black men, 1 white, dressed like itinerant preachers. They moved with him, obeyed him, shared his calm fury. Disciples. In the cellar they found proof, an underground laboratory. Medical instruments laid out with obsessive care, sketches pinned to walls, studies of limbs, torsos, skulls. Some drawings depicted arrangements yet to be attempted. Bodies posed as choirs, circles of severed heads like halos. And notes, always notes. Beauty in symmetry. Suffering prolongs awareness. Next, the Carrington feast. Most chilling signs that not all victims had died instantly. Shackles bolted into beams. Restraints built with carpenter's precision. The coroner shuddered. These weren't slaughtered. They were studied alive. Isaac had refined his cruelty. Death now drawn out, observed, documented. Each body a lesson. Each scream part of his experiment. Investigators found fresh supplies, too. New scalpels, unopened jars of preserving salts, maps of nearby plantations. The massacre at Randolph wasn't an ending. It was rehearsal for something bigger. A campaign across Virginia. Isaac was staging his rebellion not in fire and gunpowder, but in artificial order. Daring the world to look away. Lawmen left that house broken. Veterans who had seen war wept into their hands. Even Sheriff Hawthorne, hardened as stone, admitted later he feared not Isaac's knife but his mind. He wanted to show us a future, he said, where the line between master and slave ends in the same grave, same dance, same silence. Isaac had become more than fugitive. He was architect, conductor, prophet of death. And with disciples at his side, his shadow stretched wider than one man's reach. Spring 1847, Randolph Plantation. 49 bodies posed in grotesque unity. Isaac was no longer alone. Is death the only equalizer in a world built on chains? The Carrington plantation was chosen not by chance but by Isaac's own notes. In the back pages of his journals, investigators had found a chilling line. Next, 12 guests. 1 feast. Arrangement. The date matched the evening of March 29, 1847. Colonel James Carrington, a veteran of the War of 1812, agreed to play bait in what would become the most dangerous trap Virginia had ever set. Lawmen hid rifles in the hedges, crouched in lofts, even posed as servants. The dinner table gleamed with silverware. Laughter forced between guests who knew armed men crouched behind every door. Outside, the night was too still. Even the cicadas hushed. Then it came, not through the door, not through the windows. A sound beneath the dining floorboards, scratching like nails on wood. Before anyone could rise, planks splintered open, and 4 figures surged upward from a black tunnel. Isaac first, hair wild, eyes alight with cold fire. 3 disciples followed, blades glinting, faces masked in calm. The guests screamed, but Isaac raised one hand and the room froze. He moved not like a raider, but like a conductor stepping to his podium. You live in illusions, he told them, voice steady. Tonight you see symmetry. For 2 hours he toyed with them. He paced between chairs, arranging bodies as if rehearsing positions for a tableau. He spoke of death as art, of beauty in the stillness after breath. He forced the Carringtons to look at two servants he had already slain, positioned side by side, necks cut with surgical grace. "Observe," he whispered. "Even silence can sing." Lawmen watched from cracks in the shutters, fingers on triggers. But the risk was immense. One wrong shot and hostages would fall first. Colonel Carrington himself kept steady, signaling with subtle hand gestures to the hidden rifles. He'd fought battles before. He knew when patience saves lives. Isaac lectured like a teacher, his disciples nodding at every word. He pressed his knife to the colonel's throat, not cutting, just tracing where the vein pulsed. "This," he said softly, "is the hinge of life. One touch and you cross." The room quivered, but no one dared move. Finally, Carrington shifted his hand on the tablecloth, the prearranged signal. In an instant, windows shattered, doors burst wide. Rifles cracked like thunder. Isaac staggered, struck in the chest, still clutching his blade. His disciples tried to shield him, but the lawman had angles covered. In seconds, 4 bodies sprawled across the dining floor, blood soaking the linen in a crimson parody of wine. For the first time, Isaac's silence broke. A gasp, almost like a laugh, rattled from his lips before the light left his pale gray eyes. His final tableau was unplanned. A butcher brought low not by rage but by the cold geometry of bullets. The Carringtons lived, but none forgot the night death tunneled beneath their feet. Sheriff Hawthorne wiped his brow, muttering, "The devil doesn't knock. He digs." March 29, 1847, Carrington Plantation. Isaac's final standoff ends in gunfire and blood. Would you call this justice? Or silence forced by bullets? Isaac died on the dining floor of the Carrington house, but his shadow did not. The sheriff's men carried his body into the yard, pale eyes still open, blood pooling where no blood had been before. For weeks afterward, no one slept easy in Cumberland County. Lanterns burned through the night, rifles leaned by every door, and the old confidence of the master class cracked like brittle glass. The investigation stretched into summer. Journals, sketches, and letters found in Isaac's cellar revealed plans far beyond Peetton or Randolph. 6 more plantations were marked on his maps, each with routines studied, dinner parties noted, guard schedules memorized. He called it his treatise on mortality. To lawmen, it was evidence. To slaveholders, it was nightmare. Proof that the people they claimed to own could watch, plan, and strike with a precision that no whip could erase. Virginia sealed the files. Court clerks were ordered to lock the evidence in vaults for the preservation of public order. To speak Isaac's name became taboo in polite company. But in the quarters, whispers spread faster than chains could stop. Mothers told children of the man who knew the body's secrets, who turned knives against masters, and left silence where laughter had been. Some called him a monster. Others called him a lesson. Sheriff Hawthorne wrote in his private notes, "What terrifies me is not that Isaac killed, but that he studied. Rage I can understand, but a ledger of flesh? That shows a mind trained, sharpened, and denied its rightful tools." He never showed that page to the governor. The Peetton massacre, the Randolph feast, the Carrington standoff. These became folklore. Stories too gruesome to forget, too dangerous to repeat. Some claimed Isaac still lived, walking roads in disguise, his death faked by lawmen. Others swore his disciples carried his gospel southward, teaching new hands to cut with silence. Truth blurred into myth and myth into warning, but the deepest legacy was fear. Planters began locking doors at night, posting double watches and sleeping lighter. They had always believed rebellion would roar in flames and muskets. Isaac proved it could come in whispers, in journals, in the calm arranging of heads at a dinner table. He turned their own system into his camouflage, the butcher's shop, the surgeon's cut, the obedience mistaken for ignorance. In doing so, he showed every enslaver in Virginia that control was never complete. History books did not keep his name. The reports lay sealed until after the Civil War, when a few yellowed pages surfaced, too late to matter. But the memory lived elsewhere, in the hush that fell when the story was told by firelight, in the uneasy glance of a master checking his locks twice, in the quiet pride of those who whispered, "One of ours made them tremble." And so the question remains, echoing through the years, Was Isaac the Butcher a monster born or a monster made? 1847 Virginia. Isaac's knives silenced. His legacy louder than any scream. Do you believe Isaac was erased as a warning or as a fear? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe. Because the stories buried in blood are the ones they never wanted you to hear.